Aguini Ushla, tá fear fáilte roimh fad an seo anocht. Delighted that you're with us in the Ormond Hotel. Didn't realise until tonight how much green and orange I had in my wardrobe. I settled on black. Now, tá fear fáilte rih gach éine, tá míad chun taucí na hÉireann a phlé anocht. I know many of you, but just in case I'm Emer Vrain on, if I wasn't here as your chairperson this evening, this is a discussion I'd attend. I'd be interested in it. I'll tell you about why in just a moment. It's a public meeting. We'll discuss constitutional change, the likelihood of a border poll, and Irish unity. And I'm sure lots of other issues as well will come to the fore. Tá ceistena ríthófachta á phlé againn. Agus tá an simagum sa chórá seo, nar bhíonn an deis againn breanú chun cín, is brálam tuairimí a cloisiint, ó gach taobh agus bheith páirteach ann. It's the 9th meeting in this series, organised by a pro-Irish unity civic group called Ireland's Future. So far, some of you may realise or you may not, they've had meetings in Cork, in Galway, in Dublin, Derry, Armagh, Limerick, Dundalk and Waterford. And they've also hosted international events recently in Philadelphia, in New York and in Westminster in London as well. My day job is with the local radio station KCLR, where I present the mid-morning talk show in Carlow, Kilkenny. We're regarded as a very traditional constituency. So a lot of the issues I hear about on radio, for instance, agriculture is very strong in Carlow, Kilkenny. Hurling as well is another one. So it's great we've Nicky Brennan with us here tonight. We're probably better at squash in Carlow, but you never hear about that, Nicky. Everybody has their own baggage when it comes to discussions like the one we're having this evening. We all bring our own perspectives, and it's based on different factors. Sometimes it's our rearing, sometimes it's our lived experiences, sometimes it's history. Many of us will be swayed and influenced by others as well, and it can be a mix of all of these things. There's a huge chunk of the population, though, we need to realise, that have lighter baggage, because the painful memories of the past don't haunt us, maybe to all of us in the same way, because we've had different experiences. I'm a huge Father Ted fan, and I can find a Father Ted quote for almost every quandary I've been in. And if somebody asked me if I was on the panel answering some of the tough questions, I'd probably say that would be an ecumenical matter. And I'm mentioning Father Ted because it's one of those very successful TV shows for Channel 4, and another one, and the biggest one since then, is Derry Girls. Now, it's not until this week, actually, that I watched my first episode of Derry Girls, and it was the finale. And if you haven't seen it, I'd urge you to have a look at it, because it's become an incredible educational resource for people on the Good Friday Agreement, through down-to-earth friendships, through 90s music and all of that. And I've read so much online and elsewhere about the last 5 minutes of that episode, and comments from people who say it did more to educate viewers in Britain about the Good Friday Agreement than all their time in school. The writer Lisa McGee told a disturbing account of the North's history, but she did it with a lot of laughter. And think about the serious message behind what I've just said there for a moment. Because I believe in the incredible power we have working in radio and television, but a comedy series stepped in there where the curriculum failed to adequately represent the history of Ireland and the North. In the episode's opening scenes, we saw Orla getting her copy of the Good Friday Agreement. It was delivered to every household and voter before the election so that people could make an informed decision. Writer, campaigner, peace builder Emma de Souza, she wrote in Monday's Examiner, and she contrasted this with the Brexit referendum, which has been rife with misinformation, with inflamed rhetoric. And she said people had no concrete detail in the North as to the actual outworkings of such a vote. My memories as a 14-year-old who went to school in Carlow Town, my father worked for An Post all his life. He had access to copies of the Good Friday Agreement, which I hand-delivered to school, much to the delight of my history teacher, a Connemara woman. And among my fondest school memories are of that day, because Inni Ní Caníla, as we called her then, she recognised the historic occasion that we were living in, and she ensured every teenager in her class and all her history students grasped the meaning of the peace deal. And back to why I'm very interested in hearing from our panel tonight, and I hope you will be too. I've got a copy of Bunrocht na Héireann here. The price tag is still on the back of it, $2.54 in the Carlow bookshop, so that shop's been closed a while. If you don't have your own copy, have a look at it. Article 3, it's the firm will of the Irish nation, in harmony and friendship, to unite all the people who share the territory of the island of Ireland in all the diversity of their identities, their traditions, recognising that a united Ireland shall be brought about only by peaceful means, with the consent of a majority of the people, democratically expressed in both jurisdictions in the island. Achorda, our nation's constitutional aim is to unite the people in all their diversity by peaceful means. Any conversation cannot exclude any group. It can't exclude anyone's opinion, but we cannot suppress debate, we cannot ignore these issues, we cannot pretend they're not relevant. Brexit has posed constitutional questions. It's posed questions for all of us, and we need to explore them. Now let's introduce our panel tonight. Each speaker will get 5 minutes, so we let them talk, and then I'll ask the panelists some questions, and then I'll open it up to the floor and we'd welcome your thoughts. So joining us this evening, please give a warm welcome to Labour TD Éadán O'Riordan, Sinn Féin TD Kathleen Funchion, Fianna Fáil TD John McGuinness, 35th President of the GAA Nicky Brennan, and GAA Diversity and Inclusion Ambassador Abood Al-Jamali.
So just in case you're confused, I'm not Eamon Ryan. I get confused from all the time. There's a bit of Dublin sort of wit that goes, there he is, fucking sleepwalking. Which I get the odd time as I walk through the city centre on the way home. Anyways, I'm delighted to be here in Kilkenny. I'm delighted to talk on this topic. I want to talk a little bit about the baggage that you described earlier. About my own family's history, if you like, with the national question or with nationalism or with the search for Irishness. My grandfather would have fought in the War of Independence, would have fought in the Civil War, would have been on the anti-treaty side in the Civil War, did the whole hunger strike thing. He escaped from prison during that whole period, and then, ironically enough, as a young Cavan man trying to overthrow the border, he then became a customs officer in the 30s. I have a grand-uncle who fought in the 1916 Rising, Michael O'Riordan. And our family history about the Rising is interesting because our family never really got very motivated by the rhetoric of fighting for Ireland, because his story was interesting. He later in his life married a Protestant woman from the north of Ireland. He had to get married at 7 o'clock in the morning in the sacristy of the local church because it wasn't a celebration for an inter-religious marriage. He had 2 children, both of who emigrated to England. So our family's history with the Rising is of this person who, would be celebrated, I suppose, or that action would be celebrated. But his family history was that his marriage was second rate in the eyes of the society in which he lived because he married a Protestant, and also that his children weren't afforded the economic opportunity to stay in this country and actually were afforded a life and a job and a future in the very country that he had, if you like, sought independence from. So we've always had a strange relationship with this question in my family. We haven't necessarily always been taken in by the trappings of nationalism or the trappings of flags or the trappings of that whole movement, because there is, on the other side of it, a very real economic reality when, these things are put aside for a moment. People, they still have to live, they still have to work, they still have to, feed their children. My own journey, if you like, I was always interested, however, in that period, and I was born Aidan O'Riordan, and as my mother says to me, I lost the run of myself going to college, and I changed my name to Irish and became Éadán O'Riordan. Not that my older brothers would ever admit that when people used to ring the house looking for Éadán and they say, nobody here like that, and put down the phone, back in the days before mobile phones for anybody of my generation. But I suppose I was always fascinated by the Irish language. I changed my name to Irish. I believe fundamentally in the re-Gaelicization of the nation, if you like. I was heavily involved in college. And then I became a primary school teacher in a place called Sheriff Street in Dublin's north inner city. And all these rarefied notions of the Irish language and culture and heritage, all the rest of it, are really tested when you're faced with that level of deprivation, with that level of vulnerability, with that level of poverty, when the basic ability to be able to be fed or to read is the biggest challenge that any child will come across. And coming into a classroom faced with that, with your title of Mr. O'Riordan and your ideas about Irish language or Gaelic games, or the history of the country, or the proclamation on the wall, when a child is struggling to basically read, or is coming to school hungry, or doesn't have basic provisions that you took for granted in your childhood, it challenges the whole point of our republic. And it challenges nationalism. And it challenges the veneration to a flag. And that's where the change came in my life. From, it is easy enough for somebody like me with my background to feel strongly about these themes about unification of the country or nationalism or cultural nationalism. And yet these children have little enough to eat. Challenges that I don't face, discrimination that I don't face because of their accent, because of their address. You discover that 1/3 of the children who leave disadvantaged primary schools have basic reading difficulties. You take 2 children, one from a disadvantaged background, one from a more advantaged background. This child has 400 words, this child has 1,200 words. So for all the talk of nationalism or unification or the glory of the rising or the war of independence, this gap between this child with 400 words and this child with 1,200 words is the great debate and the great challenge. This was my political journey. I would ask them to go down to the library on a Saturday, take out a book in the local library, which I assumed, from my middle class background, would be open. And they came back to me on the Monday morning and said, "The library's not open on Saturday, sir." And I said, why is it in where I grew up in Malahide in County Dublin, that it's just assumed that the library would be opened on a Saturday where I grew up, but in this inner city community it wasn't open on Saturday. And this again challenges what really is important. Now, when I did become a teacher and I did become a principal of the school, I got a great piece of advice from a principal of a neighbouring school. And he said to me, no matter what you do, because you're going to have conflict, you're going to have rows, you're going to fall out with teachers, you're going to, not necessarily fall out with teachers, but you're going to have conversations with teachers or conflicts, or you're going to have to try and convince teachers or parents or Department of Education or the CINO or the teacher unions. You're going to have lots of debates and a lot of discussions, and you're going to have a level of tension or conflict in your job. But the fundamental thing you have to remember is that at the core of every decision that you make and that you try to defend is a child. And if there's a child at the centre of everything you're trying to achieve, then they mightn't agree with you always, but nobody can ever question your integrity. Now, in Irish education, we don't put children at the heart of the debate. We love, through our history, separating children, telling children in different parts of the country that they weren't Irish enough. You're not Irish if you play that game. You're not Irish if you dance that dance. You're not Irish if you speak this language. And if you take that to a certain extent for certain people on the far right, you're not Irish if you look a certain way. And this search for Irishness has been quite exclusionary over the years. Okay? So in Irish education, we've loved separating children. We separate them on the basis of religion. We separate them on the basis of gender. We separate them on the basis of income. I suppose the central point I'm trying to make in my brief, if you like, CV that I'm giving you today from my own family background to my teaching life is that I believe that we can convince anybody of anything if there is a child or a person or humanity at the centre of our argument. Now, if I live in the north of Ireland and I'm not convinced, if I live in what's now the Republic of Ireland and I'm not convinced, I may be willing to travel a journey with you if at the heart of your argument is humanity or a child. Because in the times I spend in the north, I see people who are committed to emblems, I see they're committed to flags, I see them committed to that identity. I understand that. But they face the same challenges of unemployment, of addiction, of trauma, of pain, of educational disadvantage. The school leaving rate in the north is frightening, early school leaving rate. But there's things in the Republic that we can only dream of that people in the North take for granted. Free school books, for example. Free GP care. So in arguing for a united society, and move forward to a united country, in my estimation, which is something I believe in, I do want to achieve, and I think I never thought in my childhood that we would be genuinely having this discussion in a real sense that this is coming and that we have to prepare for it. Because I absolutely believe, and my party believes, that this is coming and we have to be prepared for it, and we want to be persuaders for this. But it has to be on the basis of humanity, of the person, of the child, and how this new entity, whatever it may be called, whatever flag it may fly over it, whatever anthem we may sing, or whatever new dawn we have, it has to be the experience of the child and the person that is forefront in our discussion. Because if it comes down to the other things, well then you're just going to lead to disappointment. Just as my granduncle, who fought as a teenager in the forecourts in the Easter Rising, who got married and was told to be ashamed of it, who had 2 children and was ashamed that they had to leave this country and build a life for themselves over in England. So that's the central message that I want to give to you this evening. Okay. So thanks for your time. Okay.
Do you want to go next, Kathleen? Or John, do you want to come up next? So we'll have John McGuinness now, and we'll give John 5 minutes just to outline his position. Thanks, John.
Well, very briefly, we have come through the Good Friday Agreement, and I think there's an obligation on all politicians, North and South, to begin to look at what a new Ireland might look like, to begin to examine what a new republic would look like, and to understand what we have now will inform us as to where we will go for the future. So we have enjoyed a republic here, 26 counties. Emer has outlined to you really a definition of what that republic is all about. So if we agree with that, and I do, then I also agree with reaching consensus around the unification of the country. I believe in peaceful means and negotiation. I believe in building on the Good Friday Agreement, which represents for me a huge step forward in time to have people who would not sit around the table to do just that, and to set aside all of their extreme beliefs, their tribalism, and to reach an agreement that would bring peace in the North and therefore peace across the island of Ireland. So if we were to look at a new Ireland, a new republic, we have to explain what does it look like. We have to take what we have in Ireland, in the 26, and we have to look at Northern Ireland and ask, what can we do as a country that will even the playing field for everyone? And as you look at education, or health, or any of the big issues of the day, and Brexit is a big issue, you have to reach a consensus on that, that will lift the boats of everyone in society. That takes a long time to achieve, and we need to start now. And that's why I welcome this conversation this evening. There will be political parties that will take a different view. There will be individuals in those political parties that will have a different view, a different perspective, a different goal that they want to reach. So if you set it out in general terms, it is about republicanism. It's about a republic. It's about getting people to support the idea of equality, to support the idea that everyone is equal, that there is respect for your religion, whatever it is, and none, that there is respect for your political beliefs, whatever they are, and that all of us can live then on that island and develop our economic structure, which will deliver an all-island economy. And the fruits of that all-island economy will deliver the funding that will be required to achieve equality in education, to have a better health system that both North and South can buy into, that will deal with the issues of the day. And in general terms, most of that is based on our economic approach to the island of Ireland. I was lucky enough to meet with Martin McGuinness on a number of occasions and to promote a cross-border economic activity that would benefit the communities of the North and the South. And believe you me, it worked. He worked, not just for the movement that he saw or that he was part of. He worked for the view of the Northern Ireland people generally and the friendship that could be built and the gains that could be taken from building on a friendship in the South. In later life, it could be said that Ian Paisley took the same journey. And when you see those two big characters standing for all of that tribalism on either side of that divide, coming together to achieve something positive in terms of the development of the North and South, then I believe we can take the Good Friday Agreement and go the same distance that they went in the interest of all the people that we represent. Because at the end of the day, it is about living in peace, gaining from our economic development, and then spreading the spoils of that equally. So no one is marginalized. So no one feels that they're being left out. And a true republic, taking the French model perhaps, will deliver all of that. If we start the conversation early enough, we will identify where the issues are. We'll be able to separate out those issues and find a solution. And each issue is part of a greater jigsaw, same as what they did in the Good Friday Agreement. So in a room like this, where there are many opinions, I'm sure, and many of them are diverse, many of them are, come from a tradition of one kind or another politically. If we can put it aside, even this evening, and look at the issues and try and determine what direction we might take, then we will be making a contribution to the outcome, which I believe should be a republic of the island of Ireland that will bring us all the benefits of what true republicanism stands for. Thanks.
Garamil Magat, John, and now we'll have Kathleen Funchion, our local Sinn Féin deputy.
Thanks very much, Emer, and also thanks to Jerry and everyone for organising this event. I'm still getting used to being back to in-person events. It's great not to be looking at everyone on a screen, but it is, it's actually funny how you get out of practice of it. So first of all, I just want to acknowledge that at the moment, throughout society, what we've heard a lot of discussions on over the last number of weeks and months is the crisis of the cost of living and how people are struggling. And I'm sure everybody in this room can identify with that in one way or another, whether it's fuel or electricity, various prices going up. So while in one way it's a very challenging time to be involved, I suppose, in politics and in decision making, it's also a very exciting time because from my point of view, I think we could be genuinely on the cusp of real change throughout the country, both North and South. The Good Friday Agreement has been referenced already. I was 17 when the Good Friday Agreement was signed. I remember watching it on the television in our dining room, and certainly never would have thought, didn't think much about it, being really honest, and never would have thought it would have played any subsequent role in my own life. And I think actually Brexit has brought the whole situation of the potential of a United Ireland really into stark contrast, which is kind of ironic when you think about it, because there was such a move in England with people who are supporting Brexit to get away from the European Union, and potentially they brought on themselves the topic of a United Ireland. Maybe a little bit of karma in that, but anyway. So I wanted to just make a few points in general, though, because we're talking about Ireland's future, and obviously a United Ireland and the potential for a border poll is sort of associated with this event, but I think it's important as well to look at, in general, what type of Ireland and what type of a society we want to see. And that might sound a bit sort of romantic or idealistic, but for me, I suppose, part of the reason I got involved in politics, and it's not something I ever saw happening in my life, and those of you in the room that know me haven't heard that story, so I won't repeat it. But for me, it's why I got involved, and particularly why I got involved in Sinn Féin. And next year I'll actually be 20 years in the party, and I genuinely feel that we're talking about the same issues for all of that time. And in fact, unfortunately, to a certain extent, some of those issues are getting a lot worse. So in relation to housing, in relation to the affordability of housing, particularly for young people who are just totally locked out of potentially ever owning their own home, people who are stuck renting for €1,000, €1,200, and that's actually at the lower end of the scale. People who are then on housing waiting lists. If you look at our health situation in terms of whether that's your physical health and you're waiting on an operation, or access to mental health services. And these are stories that I'm sure everybody can relate to in one way or another. And then, and which was in the news over the last few weeks, is the issue of children with additional needs. And we just heard today about potentially what I would see as a really ridiculous plan to, around children with autism being put into these centres, as they're calling them. Actually, in fairness, I think to Aon, Duncan Smith raised that today as well in the Dáil. So there are so many issues around that. Children who have an additional need are unfortunately often treated as second-class citizens. That's not the way it should be, but unfortunately that is the way it is. They have to battle for absolutely everything, and that's not what we want to see, certainly not what I want to see when I think about Ireland's future. What I want to see is genuine equality, that it's not a big absolute battle. If you think you might like to own your home one day and you and your partner are working, why should that be outside of your reach? Same in relation to access to services. If you think that your child, has additional needs and needs extra supports, why do you have to battle for absolutely everything? And same with anyone struggling with their health or mental health. And that's just to touch on a handful of topics, because I know that there's a lot of other issues, and a lot of issues in particular facing rural communities, particularly around transport and the lack of transport, and yet we're being told to slow down in your cars and take public transport. Well, in lots of our areas, unfortunately, there is no public transport, so it's not an option. And so that brings me also to another point in relation to women, I suppose. As a woman involved in politics, I would like to see more women getting involved in politics, and I also would like us to have decent, proper access to health services and reproductive health services, and in particular health. And there's been a lot of scandals in the area of women's health, and I think we need to address that and learn from our history going forward, that we don't want a situation where women and children were treated appallingly for years in this country. We want to learn from that and move forward, and that's another thing I think we need to bear in mind when we're talking about what type of a society and what type of Ireland we want going forward. So, not to leave out the issue of United Ireland, because I think it would be very strange to be the Sinn Féin representative and not speak about that. But I do think that a border poll is obviously allowed for in the Good Friday Agreement. Some people panic and think, oh my gosh, this means a United Ireland tomorrow, and I'm not sure how that will look. I don't think there's a need for any panic. I think this is something that needs to be done over a period of time. I think we need to look at the Citizens' Assembly type forums in relation to planning for a border poll. We've had very successful Citizens' Assemblies here in the past, and what we certainly don't want is a situation like they had with Brexit, where they talked about it, probably never thought it was going to happen. It did happen, and then they panicked and didn't know what to do. So I think we need to bring people with us. Obviously, I want to see United Ireland. No one will be shocked to hear that. But I do think we need to have a really honest and open conversation. It needs to be inclusive. It needs to include everybody. I think John gave a good example of Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness working together, which people would never have envisaged. And I think if they can do it, we all certainly can. And I think that they really led by example. So I suppose there are some of the main points I kind of wanted to make. And then if there's any questions, we'll try our best to answer them. Thanks, Emer.
Now we'd welcome Nicky Brennan, 35th President of the GAA. Thanks, Nicky.
Good Emer. Apologies if I'm coughing a bit. I have one of those bloody coughs that just won't go away. So when you have a remedy during the night or later on, you can let me know. It's more than Friblo done bet Ivor Maskanocht, and I'm delighted to be here. I suppose being in the company of 3 politicians, just from my own perspective, I'm not involved in politics. My background, I suppose my family background would have been Fine Gael. My father was very involved in it, stood for the council on one occasion, and my brother and my nephew still carry the flag. But I'm not involved in any particular party, to be honest about it. And I would want to say at the outset here that anybody who enters politics and who stands for office, I admire them. Whatever their politics, I admire them, because it's a bloody thankless job. And I think we should appreciate the people who stand and the people who are elected. We won't agree with them, we might vehemently disagree with them, but we should always respect their opinions. Now, from my own perspective, I suppose I have a bit of an advantage over all of these people here, that I'm a bit older than them. John McGuinness and I were born in the same, around the same time, but I have 2 years on John McGuinness, I think, at this stage. So through the 50s and the 60s, we saw the challenges in the 70s that Ireland faced, and there were many. And I suppose it's often hard to explain, even to my own children now who are well grown up, the challenges that we faced, and where houses didn't necessarily have electricity, didn't have running water. So we have made tremendous progress, and through the advent of the common market in the early 70s, our country is now a very well-off country, notwithstanding the huge challenges that are there. And that we would now be talking about the notion of a united Ireland. I think it's good that that debate is taking place, and I welcome these discussions. But as one of the non-politicians on the panel, I would caution that there's a lot of things that are exercising the minds of people around the country at the moment. They have been referred to, the cost of living and the challenges that are there at this point in time. Health services. Kathleen has alluded to them. I'm not going to go through the detail there, but many of you at a personal level will have experienced the real challenges of the health services there, and we seem to be 2 steps forward, 1 step back on a regular basis. The housing crisis is it's just awful that young people, how are they going, will they ever get to own a house? It is utterly frustrating for them. And now we have obviously the challenges of the Ukrainian people coming into the country, which of course we have to address. And nobody has mentioned yet the challenge of climate change. It is something we cannot ignore. It is there, and will our generation be the one that at least will say we need to do something about it and help those coming after it? Because my children, and especially my grandchildren, God knows what the future will hold for them if we now don't do something about it. But I also have 2 other areas that have particularly interested me. I'm from the country, 6 miles outside out towards Ballyraggus, where I live, and rural Ireland is important to me. And rural Ireland is under pressure. It's under pressure. Transport was alluded to, but many other areas. And I'll come to the part that Jay is playing in that in a moment. I'm also the Kilkenny Age-Friendly Ambassador, and that is an area that concerns me greatly, that are older people being looked at, and can older people aspire to grow old in their own houses? Because that is ultimately what older people want to do, grow old in their own houses. And can we have the facilities and the wherewithal in place to enable that to happen? Of course, the world has been discommoded from an Irish perspective very much over recent years, with Brexit and of course with the war in Ukraine. And you cannot ignore that, and that has impacted much of what we do here. And there is the notion of a border poll. All I will say is that a border poll, yes, but we must know what's involved in a border poll. We must map out what are the issues, because recently in the Irish news there was a survey conducted, and there's a lot of people north of the border here are not convinced about the notion of a united Ireland yet, because it's not being spelled out. What exactly does it mean? How will we facilitate the multiple traditions and diversities in a new Irish constitution? How will we do that? Abood will probably refer to something like that. And what are the economic challenges facing a 32-county Ireland? We know the economic challenges down here, but there's equally challenges up there where there's a very strong and a strongly populated civil servant, which is a lot of the workforce up there. And we still have to have a relationship with the UK, which must be strong from economic and all sorts of reasons, because many of our people are living in the UK and they're coming forward and backwards. And what will a united Ireland be in the context of Europe, and how will we be looked on in the context of Europe? So that's important. So we must have that debate, but we do need to impress on government and all government parties to start identifying what are all of the issues out there. Because if you try to ram solutions down, it won't work. Citizens' Assembly will certainly be one way of doing it, but there must be strong engagement. From a GA perspective, During my 3 years as GA President, 2006 to 2009, I spent a lot of time in the North. I met many of the people up there. In fact, Martin McAleese, Mary McAleese's husband, he invited me on a number of occasions to meet many people up there. And let's be honest about it, you know, I was a bit afraid meeting them to some extent, let's put it that way. But I found there were people you could engage with. I'm not going to mention names here, but there were people that had been very, very much involved in the atrocities. But I spoke to them. They were human. And we talked about a lot of things. I invited some people from strong non-nationalist organisations to Croke Park for chats during matches and behind the scenes and all of that, because it's part of what we had to do. I addressed the non-national schools at their annual meetings in the North, the first person ever invited to do that. I met with Edmund Poots and we attended the first Gaelic Games match ever in Newry. So all of this, and there was a lot more. I met with Peter Robinson in Stormont and various nationalist leaders as well. And I found them all people you could talk to. And I always felt that as long as we were talking, it was far better than shouting and fighting at one another. Now, I was a very small fish, but an important fish because the GAA is extremely influential up in the 6 counties in Northern Ireland in so many different ways. And it continues to be influential. And it is challenging, it has been challenging for the GAA because grounds have been called after people who who were killed illegally, of course, and it has caused numerous issues. So the GAA is an organisation in the North that was recognised in the time of the late Danny Murphy, the former Secretary General. He impressed on the British government to be more facilitating towards the GAA because the GAA was a major influencer in the 6 counties in Northern Ireland. So in all of the work that the GAA will do, we are an important component in how a new Ireland might come about, through our relationships, through our identity, through the facilities that we have developed. No organisation has the facilities like we have developed around the country. Our community and, of course, numerous other programmes. And I hope that when the debate takes place and when people are sitting down, they will consider how an organisation like the GAA, is it political? Of course it's damn political, with a small p. It cannot be otherwise. I'm not going to stand up here and say it's not, but it must be involved at the table because it has influence, and I hope it has influence for good. Gur mille maith.
Thank you very much, Nikki. And Abood Al-Jumali is the GAA's Diversity Officer.
Dig wish everyone. It's a great pleasure to be invited here today and to have the opportunity to take part in this important debate, a topic that we're all passionate about, Ireland's future. To introduce myself, my name is Abood Al-Jumali, also known as Bonner Olinchik. I have developed a deep love for the GAA at 13 years of age, and that deep love has led me to being an ambassador for the best association on the planet. I am the founder of Now That's Lovely Hurling, an organisation that is based on real life experiences and works to promote unity and joint action. My background is in law, diplomacy and international relations. I'm an aspiring Irish diplomat. I was born in Baghdad, moved to Ireland at 9 years of age. I started school at 10 years of age without a word of English. It was challenging starting full-time education without any English nor knowledge of society and its culture, as this has led to many culture clashes and miscommunications, but thankfully I have survived. Ladies and gentlemen, I stand here before you all to try and make a difference which will ensure our children and youth can grow and flourish in peace. A lot of people think ending conflict in Ireland is not possible. I totally understand the pain and suffering that both sides, the North and South, have endured. I myself can relate to conflict. When America invaded Iraq, tens of thousands of Iraqi people were displaced, killed, lost. Some have not even been found today. The civil war took place straight after the invasion. There was a time where there were actually 2 wars on consecutively, the invasion and civil war. People were killing people over identity. In the 21st century, anyone that kills or attempts to kill someone over their identity or who they are hurting. Whilst this cannot be condoned, They must be brought to the discussion and listened to so they too can see the importance of true dialogue and understanding. Sectarianism is a political failure by grown-up adults who cannot come up with an agreement between themselves that is in the interest of all the people. The past is the past. I'm not saying completely forget the past. It's important to know and be aware of our history, acknowledge it, accept what has happened, and let's all try to move on for a brighter future together. In the interest of international relations and public policy, it is vitally important to not shape our future based on our past, which entailed conflict. Conflict is never the answer. Negotiation of peace is. Tolerance, acceptance, diversity, the inclusion of people for who they are, certainly affirms the essence of peace. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, the future Ireland that I envisage is inclusive and tolerant. It should look at for and look after its citizens, people and neighbours, irrespective of race, colour, religion or class. Ireland has evolved and is now a diverse, welcoming society, and this should be promoted, encouraged and welcomed. I am a proof of that. I firmly believe that together we can bring about change that is in the interest of democracy, our children, our youth, our elderly, our people, our society, our wonderful country, Ireland. Now that's lovely Harlan. Gravia Mahago.
Good man abood. Úntaach ar fad. Now we're going to take questions shortly from the floor, but first I'll have a discussion with the panel, and I might start. I'll just throw the ball in, and you can decide who will take this one. John McGuinness is looking away from me now. There's a lack of unionists obviously involved in this discussion we're having this evening. How can we have these discussions without having unionists involved in the process?
Well, we can't. We have to have them involved. I think that every party and none have to be at the table for these discussions. So this is the first step. It's the first meeting that I've been at to discuss the North, the South, the relationship, what the future might look like. And we've had the speakers this evening outline some of what they might like to see. And we've acknowledged, I think, in a way, the real serious problems that are there to be dealt with. So you have to identify the problems and you have to understand them to try and move forward. You have to have not just the unionists, there may be other views out there that we need to hear from. And if you're going to build a society, a country that observes equality, that observes all of the Republican ideals that you would find in a republic, then you have to include everyone. So by way of a first meeting, this is a start. But we do have to get over the fact that we don't have a ready-made unionist grouping or population here in the South. But no doubt, as you grow it, then you will find out. No one has addressed, for example, the cost to Ireland of a united Ireland, given the amount of money that the North receives from Britain. So there's lots of other avenues that have to be explored as well. But the first one is this meeting and the inclusion of everyone.
Okay, Aon?
Well, I think many people in politics now understand that this maxim of nothing about us without us. So you wouldn't have any discussion about any section of Irish society without them being in the room, be it travellers or women or LGBT community or whoever. And that used to be the way, that we used to talk about a section of Irish society, but they wouldn't be in the room. You will have to understand, I mean, I listen to young people now and I listen to the emotion. I remember the first week of the general election being all about the RIC. I remember having emotional discussions on doorsteps with young men who were getting all excited about our colonial past. I hear these comments in pubs by, it tends to be younger men talking about the occupied six and how this great injustice needs to be sorted out. And I say to myself, well, that's fine, but there's 1 million people in Northern Ireland who have a view, and they will get as emotional about the sacrifices their grandfathers made, or the person who was killed in their family, or the emblem that they feel very strongly about. Or the fact that I understand, talking to community groups in the north, that there's a sense of energy that young people want to get out of their system because they feel that those who went through the troubles are rarefied, are celebrated, there's songs about them, there's ballads about them, there's dedications to them, and they missed out. Now, how are we going to convince somebody who has all that in their background and who 100 years ago stepped away from this United Ireland project, this Home Rule project 100 years ago, because they thought that the South was priest-ridden and backward? Now, we may have sorted out the backward bit to a degree, but you cannot say that they weren't right about the influence of the Catholic Church in the first, whatever, number of generations of the southern state. They were right. They were right. We imposed a colonialism on ourselves, and they still have a huge influence in Irish policy. So, if we're serious about that, and serious about talking to those of a Protestant unionist tradition in the north, and say, but by the way, the Catholic Church still owns 90% of the primary schools in the country, in the Republic. You know, we have to be serious about what their fears are, because the fears of what they had 100 years ago are going to be pretty similar to the fears that they have now.
That's a very interesting discussion, but I have a feeling that could be a whole other panel discussion. Kathleen?
Yeah, so I think obviously nobody wants a United Ireland that doesn't include unionists, because I mean, like, just the basics, the flag is green, white and orange. So, I mean, and genuinely it has to be inclusive for it to work. You're not going to have, in any situation, if one side is not involved, it's not going to work. I think probably on a day-to-day and on a practical level, there's more unionists, maybe not overly supportive of United Ireland, but are not necessarily opposed to it either, particularly with Brexit, because they see the benefits potentially. I mean, particularly now with the protocol.
We see it through the strength of the alliance.
Yeah, and if there's a question mark over the protocol, those who are involved in business in particular are going to be worried about cross-border trade and the impacts of that. So they might see the practicalities of it. But that's why I think you need a forum like a Citizens' Assembly, you know, because you need to trash out all of those kind of ideas and thoughts, and I think you need to be open to whatever is going to come out of that. It might be something very different than any of us even think, but I think that forum has been successful in the past in this country about sort of having the consultation, I suppose, for want of better words. But you definitely do need to, and I think, I suppose, it would be difficult maybe if you did have a unionist view to come into something that you think might be that people in the room have a different view than you. I think it might be, so there is probably a responsibility on all of us to try and bring people with us. But I do think that things are changing, and you do see that with how the Alliance did in the most recent election as well. And I just think we need to be open to all of that, and it doesn't need to be, you know, like all of a sudden there's a United Ireland and you just kind of change the map as such. It's going to be, it could take years, could take generations for it to actually properly bed in. And then, you know, there's loads of questions around, for example, people who have potentially free healthcare. You know, are they going to want to come down to our health system that's really creaking at the seams? And there's lots of that. So that's why I think you need.
When the school books were mentioned, I was thinking of that. It's those simple things that if you take away from people, they will want to know, the basics, the cost of living that Nikki mentioned, the bread and butter issues, they're what will matter to people more maybe than the flag in many respects.
And that's why we need to be talking about it, because we shouldn't be afraid of that. I think that's why we need to have a proper, I mean, obviously this meeting is great and I know there's been a number of these, but in general, like a proper forum for people to be feeding into, I think would be really positive.
Okay. Nikki, what can I ask you about? Do you want to make a point on this issue before?
The only person who can call the border poll is the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. And nobody has mentioned the influence that the British government, now if you take the present British government, you know, it's only Britain basically, in my view, it's my view, and the colleagues on my left here would know far more about it than me. I don't think Britain has any great interest in Northern Ireland. I think they seem as a bloody nuisance a lot of the time, to be honest about it. But they're linked because of the whole union side of things. Ultimately, the influencers of where it goes with a poll on Northern Ireland is going to be the British government and what happens at that end. That's where it's going to start, and they're the people who have to be convinced, I believe, as much as the citizens of the island.
Okay. I wanted to ask you about sport as well, because you can see where it can be fraught. We've seen with Rory McIlroy, for instance, and in the Olympics, would he go under the Irish flag? Would he go under the Northern flag? What would Rory do? Talk to us about sport and the role you think, through your experience with the GAA, and how it can unite the country.
Well, I mean, the GAA is a 32 county sporting organisation. The IRFU is a 32 county sporting organisation. Soccer is not, and there's reasons behind that we don't need to go into tonight, and maybe some other organisations as well. But sport at the same time can be a good unifier. But at the same time, you know, the tribal rivalries that are there, we all know when the Republic played the North in various games, in soccer it can be very rivals and all that. Look, I think that they can be problematic, but at the end of the day, I think what sport does, irrespective of the sport here, and I'm referring to all sports here, is the ability of sporting organisations to support communities, wherever they might be around the country. I don't care whether it is in the Falls Road. I opened up the St. Bridget's GA Club on the Malone Road in Belfast. Who would ever think there'd be a GA pitch in the Malone Road in Belfast? There's a GA club now in East Belfast that's thriving up there. These are, and whether it is a soccer club or a rugby club, once you're getting kids involved in communities, once they're mixing with diverse groups in their sporting organisations, and they're not being corralled into a way of life that was there historically over the years, and they're seeing a broader picture. Once that's happening, there's a far better chance that you're going to have people civil with one another, and they'll grow into good citizens that will get on well with one another.
I find your role fascinating in the GAA, Abood, and just telling us even that, you know, you arrived in Ireland aged 10, is that what you said, 9 or 10?
9 years. I started school at 10 years.
Right, with no English at all. And what was the experience like? You were arriving from Baghdad.
I was interested in our eyes, yeah. I was interested. I mean,
where was the school? Do you mind me asking you? I love a good story, and when I was listening to you, I wanted to know more about how you found it.
Look, like, obviously, it's almost, if I was to lay out, I suppose, the how we came about, and, you know, leaving Baghdad to driving to Syria, and from Syria to going to Istanbul, and from Istanbul to come here, it's almost a movie, to be honest, right? Can be created, but like, I suppose going in and to talk about my, you know, what I have seen in Ireland, first thing coming out of the Terminal 1, I'm the eldest of 5, and the mother as well with me, so the first thing that actually that caught, you know, my attention was the air, you know, the fresh air, because I would have developed asthma back in Baghdad myself because of the whole environment, how neglected it was due to the war, and literally you could imagine all this, if you can imagine all, you know, this room, all of dust, you know, that's how we used to wake up, you know, breathing pretty much dust like. So things like, you know, the air was certainly something like...
We can't compare it to the Ormond roadworks there on the Ormond Road that are going on forever, just while they have counsellors in the room, sorry.
That's one, you know, but obviously not knowing English too, you know. It was a huge barrier. And as I mentioned as well, like not knowing the society and its culture, you know, has led to a lot of miscommunications and culture clashes. One of them, me confusing the priest with the Pope. Do you know what I mean? That was one as well back in the...
I'd say he was delighted with the promotion.
That was one, anyways. And although, you know, many things like, but I suppose when I got into the GAA, I was obviously exposed to it, you know, it used to be played on TG4, did not appeal to me whatsoever. But like, I got exposed to it because a couple of lads who was in the school was with the local club, and they said 7 o'clock train and grand, let's see what the story is. And I went down and obviously was shy at it, to be honest, you know. I was, you know, couldn't hold the hurl properly whatsoever. And I was even thinking, I was like, you know what, this is not for me. Couldn't see anyone, you know, any person kind of looked like me, etc. But then I was like, you know what, I woke up the next day, I was like, you know, let's give it another try, you know. And I'd done so, and I lifted the ball, realising that I have fallen in love, the best game on the planet, as I say it.
And you earned the title Bonner O'Lynchig.
Exactly, Bonner O'Lynchig then, you know. I remember, this is a funny story actually, because I'll be majority of times in seaman formal wear, and I have my hurl with me, so I'd be pucking around in town, in Dublin, George Street and Angel Street and all that, and people have never seen that ever, you know. Like, never mind a person who plays hurling like that, you know, never seen a person with a suit playing hurling, right? But I was on Angel Street, there's a church there, and there's this elderly lady came out, and I was just pucking the ball, you know, and then she comes out and she just looks at me, comes straight to the face and goes, where you're from, straight away, right? And I was like, from Baghdad. And she goes, and I'm like, what's your name? And I said to him, Bonner Olinchik, right? And she says, I didn't know there was any Olinchiks in Baghdad, she says. You know, so that's straight. Like if I wasn't poking a ball, let's say, you know, that she probably wouldn't have, you know, came up to me or started a conversation. And otherwise, I can tell you there's thousands and thousands of stories that can go on, and from Clonmel to Ballyhonest to, you know, to Cork, different stories. But it does break barriers a lot, like sport. Like even I would be invited to a lot of GA clubs up at the north as well, you know. And
would you have known about the history of the conflict before you came to Ireland, or would you have had any
through
awareness?
School, yeah, through school, you know. That's obviously you would have studied it, and there's a lot of. I was kind of reflecting my time, to be honest, when I was in Baghdad. Like, I was recently there in Belfast now myself, and I got a tour around, you know, to kind of refresh my Leaving Cert history, you know. And to be honest, like, it's almost you live in the moment. When you're getting told and you're thinking of these streets in Baghdad are similar to the streets around Belfast. You know, for example, oh, you can't go to there because there's an area there, or you can't go to this. I just straight away remember when I was a young child, you know, that was even worse, because when you lived there in 2007, 2008, pretty much every single day there's a funeral park that walked past, you know, past the house. Like, as I said, education for me, like primary school, was on pause for a year or two, you know. Lost members of my family, myself, witnessed things that I just happened to be there out of coincidence. But like, there's a lot of things to learn from it. I'm trying to turn this negativity into a positive thing.
Fair play to you.
So that's kind of where I am today.
Okay, excellent. I just want to ask the panel as well about some of the issues that we touched on about baggage. So people having maybe less, you know, as the society matures and as the next generation comes up, do you think we'll have a shift away from the kind of the orange versus the green? Do you think younger people, do they care less about the old politics?
Can I come in on that, Emer? I think, being really honest, most younger people are concerned with the issues that are affecting them now, which is, I mean, not to sound like a broken record, but housing genuinely is one of the number one issues, and all of the other things that we spoke around health and access to various services. I think that tends to occupy people's mind. I think if you were to ask the vast majority of people on the street, I think people do support the idea of a united Ireland. They don't necessarily think about it after that, but they would, you know, if you were asked to tick a box on a survey, they'd probably say yes. And then, but really what they're concerned with is the stuff that is affecting them. You know, and they are all the things that we need to get to grips with as well. Like, I see that very much as part of Ireland's future. Like, you know, when I think of my own two kids, I don't want them to have to go through what, you know, other people are going through in terms of just trying to get a house. You know, or even just to get a rental property, actually, at the moment is nearly impossible. So, you know, I think that's probably what occupies most people. But I do think that people like the idea of a united Ireland. They mightn't think about it after that, but I think that they do support it. And that's why I know I'm talking about Citizens' Assembly, but you know, the way they say, if you keep saying the same thing, eventually people will listen. So I just think if we had something like that, it would give the opportunity to have that debate and have that discussion.
Okay,
So.
Aon.
Well, it's like, I have a 4-year-old daughter, so I worry about when she's my age, what the plan is going to be like, what the impact of climate change is going to be like. I worry about what's happening across Europe. Our party has a very suspicious view of nationalism in every country. So what's happening in Poland is scary, what's happening in Hungary is scary, obviously what's happening in Russia is scary, what's happening in America is scary, what's happening in Britain. Brexit was, to my estimation, an English nationalist plot, which has been successful for them. But it's all about nationalism, to a degree, their place in the world. So there can be very destructive nationalism. So I think we have to ask ourselves, what is the point of a united Ireland? Is it an end in itself, or is it supposed to achieve something? It's very difficult to sell it unless it's actually supposed to achieve something. And if somebody feels as if they have been conquered by it, well, they're not going to buy into it. And I believe that there most likely in my lifetime will be a united Ireland. But I don't think it's going to have the same flag. I don't think it's going to have the same anthem. I think there's probably going to be a regional assembly in the north to facilitate I can imagine Stormont still existing, but being part of a unified state. But what is the point of it? Is it just because we have this old romantic view of the unfinished business of the revolution 100 years ago? Or because we want this to be a vehicle for something, profoundly different, that everybody genuinely is equal? And as John has quite rightly said about a true republic, a republic is not the absence of a monarchy. A republic is this radical idea that everybody is equal in this state, whether you're here for generations or if you just arrived from Ukraine a week ago. And that challenges many, many people.
Okay. If our panel are okay, I might take some questions.
Can I just
Yep.
respond? So I think young people have far less baggage. They're confronted by a whole lot of other different issues in their lives. And quite frankly, they find it difficult to get their heads around the fact that the government, regardless of what make it is, and I'm talking about back over a number of governments, don't respond in the way that they believe that they should. So there's issues there. I think that Northern Ireland and the reunification of the country is not necessarily in their top 10. It may be somewhere, but it's not necessarily up there up front. That doesn't mean that they're not interested. I think that they're interested to the extent that they know there's troubles, or had been troubles in the north. They know there's issues there. So if you're looking at where we're going from here, this is at the very beginning. This is a conversation about what we might like to see. Yes, you have to involve everyone else on the union list. Yes, it will take time. But I think it's important for young people and old people to set that time by saying, maybe we'll bring about a border poll in 5 years' time, or something like that, to set down the parameters for this discussion. And the issues then within that, health has been mentioned, housing and all of that, they have to be discussed. But there is no country in the world that has a perfect administration. There is no perfect republic. But there is, if you can achieve it, a consensus across the island of Ireland that a republic serving the true principles of republicanism will achieve for the people what they want. There is no other way other than democracy, democratic republic, and that in itself tells you that you must look after everyone equally. And we're not doing that in the South. But then again, we're not perfect. And it will never be perfect and everybody happy. So you make the best you can of it, and you try and impress then on those that are outside of that. We're saying that we pay €60 for a GP, the North doesn't, but then there are other benefits down here that would impress on the people of the North, perhaps to look at the possibilities in the future of a 32-county independent republic. And that's not something that people need run away from. It is something that has worked elsewhere. As I said to you earlier, we've come a distance with the Good Friday Agreement. And now we're just building on the back of that, not for tomorrow, as in tomorrow, but for the long term. And I think that Nicky Brennan has talked about the GAA. The GAA is the last man standing here in the South. It has the respect of everyone. It is embedded in communities. And if you look at the communities that all of us serve, including the GAA, politicians and others, then you will see that if you encourage community to look at something and you give them a broad outline of it, following closer to the time particulars of it, then you have a better chance of breaking down the tribal instinct that is in with people, north and south, not to look at these things. But it is, when you see the economic benefits abroad, it just impresses you so much that you can't get it out of your head. I can recall, I think it was Foot and Mouth, and there was a big issue about the North and so on. And when I heard Ian Paisley declaring that they actually were Irish cows, I thought to myself, well, actually, we've come a hell of a long way. And they're the basic steps that need to be put in place. Now, I just want to say one thing about what Aidan said earlier on, and I'll finish on this. about, you know, the priests and religious in the south. Yes, all of that is true, but it's also true to say that there was a real serious sectarian divide in the north, and that it was Protestant, and that was it.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so they're coming from that background, we're coming from ours, and we just haven't met because of that tribalism. But the Good Friday Agreement has broken that, and we need to move on.
Okay, thank you to our panel. Can we get a question maybe from the floor? If you just wouldn't mind introducing yourself and let us know if there's someone in particular you'd like to answer your question.
Brian Craven from Grapevine from Kildare. Thanks for having us. I suppose from a Southern Republican nationalist background, from my perspective, there's a lot of talk about what the conversation with Unionists and Republicans in the North will be in terms of concessions and barriers towards unity. And I'm just wondering, I'd love to hear from Bonner as well, because you're quite ingrained in our culture at the moment, but you're coming from a very different perspective. And even Deputy Function and John as well, from the Republican side of things. Do you envisage the conversation around barriers to unity when it comes to Republicans in both the South and the North to be more from an administrative governance side, i.e. will it be a federalised system with Stormont and the Shannon and the Dáil being kind of broke up between the North and the South? Or do you feel that there will be more symbolic issues such as the flag, such as the anthem, such as stuff like the Love Ulster riots that we saw in Dublin when there was the marches going on by the Unionists in Dublin? Or, you know, if we look at Michelle O'Neill, the big song and dance about merely saying Northern Ireland opposed to the North of Ireland, I'd just love to get some info on that.
John, you go first there. There's a lot in that.
Could you summarise it into a question for us, and we'll get you a microphone.
Perhaps you
So
can
if you
email
could
us that
just
question
have a think about. That's it. Sorry, we've forgotten the question. I'm sorry. Would you mind just giving a little synopsis so they can tackle it for you?
I was just wondering if the speakers could touch on whether or not the conversation, especially from a Republican standpoint in the South, if it was put to an all-Ireland vote, would it be more from an administrative point of view, i.e., you know, Shannon, Dáil, would it be federalised system, or do you reckon there'd be a lot of symbolic barriers for Republicans in the South? Because I feel like that's never part of the conversation when we talk about United Ireland, and there is large bastions of republicanism still present down here, such as the anthem, the flag, stuff like that.
Thanks, Brian.
Now that will be the challenge. You know, that's one of the core challenges that will be there, because it's tribal. It's people hanging on to the past to a great degree. And then perhaps it's younger people that have a view of republicanism that's not fully worked out. So things like the national anthem and the flag, they're going to be debated. There's absolutely no question about that, I would imagine. That will make people uncomfortable. But that's part of the challenges that we face. So I think Unionists and Republicans will have that type of baggage in the North, maybe less so down here. But it still means that we're going to have to discuss it, because it's going to be, if it's going to be in Ireland for everyone, and it's going to be all about equality and making sure that, you know, we all get on and so on, then we have to listen to everyone. And we have to find solutions to those challenges. And that's not going to be easy. And that's why nothing to do with the North is going to be about delivering tomorrow or the next day. It's going to be a long haul. But when you think of it this way, in the North, they get EU funding, or we get EU funding to cross-border initiatives. So there's a mechanism there for spending all of that money, all along the border and in the North. Now, economically, if people can work on that, it's a bit like eating Paisley cow. If they can work together and achieve those things, they'll see that breaking down the barrier is maybe not as bad as it would seem. And the issue about the Senate and the Dáil and the Assembly, well, maybe that's part of the journey. Maybe at some stage we'll have that, and then later on we'll have something different. But I think that we have to keep moving towards that goal.
Yeah, I suppose the reality in the North is that it's heavily public sector dependent. I think it's a disproportionate number of jobs in the North are public sector jobs. If you have a conversation in the South about it, they're gonna say all the right things to a certain point when the price tag is going to be discussed. How much is this going to cost us? And then if you're in the north, when you talk to people in the north, they are not as hung up about, maybe as we might be down here, about flags and anthems and what we're used to. They want to know about the NHS and their education system. They are used to state provision of services that we aren't. We don't provide state education or state healthcare necessarily. We've farmed it out to other people and paid them to do it. And they have a different view, a different way of doing that in the north. So how do you square that circle? So my experience of referendums, if you like, or this process is that there's 30% who will say yes, there's 30% who will say no, and there's 40% in the middle. And they're the ones who are going to ask the bread and butter issues. And again, what is the point of this? What do we get from this? Is this, as I said, the great thing that we sing songs about in pubs when we're half cut, or is the thing that we genuinely want to nitpick through discussions? And I'd say on that point about the rebel songs and all the rest of it, that's all fine when we're all in our comfort zone and we're saying, we're still using all the phraseology and the terminology and the stuff that we all know about. Go talk to a unionist who has yet to be convinced. That is what's much more use for our energy, I would think.
Okay, I know Brian wanted to hear from Abood on this as well.
Yeah, I think, to be honest with you, I hope I understand the question right now, you know. But look, I think in order for that to happen, or if there's a referendum that's going to take place, there has to be work both from Stormont and the Houses of Oireachtas together, you know, and they all come around, you know, together and discuss this to see how, you know, a referendum is feasible and is possible, you know. So it's not only the South doing their own thing and the Stormont doing their own thing, that they all have to sit around the table and see what's possible and what's in the interest of the people, both North and South, in going about that and going about a referendum. And if it is a possible, you know, a border poll.
Yeah, just very briefly, I think that's where the consultation has to happen first, I think, before a border poll, and it should be deciding things like, is it just the Dáil and Shannon? A few years ago, there was a referendum on getting rid of the Shannon. So, I mean, things can change all the time. We also have the possibility of directly elected mayors in some of our cities now. So this could be an opportunity for us to change not just whether we have a Dáil, Shannon and an assembly at Stormont, but are we going to, in general, maybe devolve more powers to local government? It could be an opportunity, and I think you know, a lot of us would welcome that as well. But I would think that kind of the consultation and that work down to those practicalities does need to be worked out in advance of a border poll, because then people actually know what they're voting on. Just one thing in relation to the flag, I wouldn't see that necessarily changing, because I think it does have the kind of two traditions, or the kind of covered as such. But sometimes I think we can all get too hung up on anthems and flags, and you know, you can, before you know it, you're kind of gone down a rabbit hole with all of that. But I do think that consultation is really important, so people know what they're voting on. But I think it could be a chance, as I said, for other changes in terms of devolving more powers.
Okay, Councillor Joe Malone, and then this man here after Joe, if that's okay, and then you in the front. Joe.
Thanks, Emer, and thanks to the panel as well. Councillor Joe Malone, my name, just said there, being a fall councillor here in the city. We're on about the unions and the Nationals going to talk. My friend here beside me is a Sinn Féin councillor, Andy Gladney, and I suppose if Micheál Martin had his way, he probably wouldn't want me sitting beside him, because he wouldn't get into any discussions with...
He'd be afraid he'd recruit you.
He wouldn't get into any discussions with Sinn Féin years ago. We have a long way to go before Ireland's future. I was just looking at it there, and I was saying, like, I came from down New Ross way, and I came up here when I was 16, 17 years of age, and I'd be thinking, what's Ireland's future? You wouldn't be too worried at 16, 17, but we say, nowadays, I am worried. I'm worried for the future. And I wrote it down there about the question, and Emer, you actually asked it, and you got the answer from the panel. Any unions taking part in these road shows? If not, why? If we're serious about a united Ireland and Ireland for all, it's important that all sides will be involved in these discussions. I didn't get your proper name, Bonner, but
Abood.
I won't even pronounce it. I'm so happy to see somebody like yourself sitting up there at the top table, and we need to see more people like yourself involved in organisations. And Nicky spoke well about the GAA, and I have a background in it myself. And the GAA is going from strength to strength, and in particular what's happening with the GAA, there's more and more women getting involved in the GAA at all levels, playing sport, camogie, like we say RT and that are given as much coverage, and KCR and community radio, you know, and I think that's great. But we have a long way to go in terms of Ireland's future, and that. Is Aidan going off?
No, I'll be back in a second.
Because I have a few. Please don't go too far, because I have a few things. I have a few things to say to you.
Okay.
Yeah, like okay.
Well, if they answered your question,
that's the question. But
Yeah, that's okay.
I have another question, but just like if unions are not prepared to share power with Sinn Féin and what's it called, the SDLP and the Alliance, like what chance have we? We have a united. Sorry, the Sinn Féin won the most seats in the poll lately, right? And I think it's disrespectful of other parties not to negotiate and form a government. Because we have to, it's going to take a long time for a united Ireland, I think. And they're making the excuse about protocol and free movement of trade. And when that's done then, when that's sorted, are they going to worry about the Irish language? You know, Nicky spoke there as well, and I agree that about Boris Johnson.
Okay.
Boris Johnson cares more about the late night parties than he does about Northern Ireland. That's my opinion, right? I know you want to move it on, but just another question. Have the goalposts been moved with the Good Friday agreement to suit one side over another? And equality, I'm going to finish now because let other people in. Equality and respect. You know, John spoke about respect, but I'm going to finish on this. And like respect for religion, you said that, John. I'm a practicing Catholic, and I won't be ashamed to say it. And I was brought up in the Catholic faith, and I was taught in Catholic schools, like most of us probably in this room, if we were to be truthful. And I knew the day that Rory Quinn was elected Education Minister, that the Catholic faith was going to be kicked out the door. And you've kept it going as well there in your comments there. Like if we're going to throw all our good qualities out the door to suit other people, well, I think that's wrong.
Okay.
I'm just going to. I think I could go on about the healthcare system here, the education, waiting list, private, public, you know, housing, and the last question. If we're going to have a united Ireland, I'm a former soldier as well, I got 30 years and I have a son in the army. Are we going to see the day that we have a united Ireland, that we're going to see Irish troops and Gardaí on the streets of Northern Ireland? Is that part of the united Ireland that we want? And thanks to everybody again, and thanks for allowing me to speak. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Joe Malone. There was a lot in that, but I just want to try and break it down a little bit, because he made some very good points that if the panel would address them, just in relation to how the people of the North ultimately will suffer while there is no real negotiations maybe going on to form a government there and to form the Assembly, if any of the panel want to address that.
Can I maybe come in on that one, Emer? So I think on a practical level, there's probably more negotiations going on than maybe is being publicised. And I think, first of all, in fairness to some of the other unionist parties, apart from the Democratic Unionist Party, ironically, Democratic Unionist Party, who don't want to get involved in the process, but the likes of the Ulster Unionists and that don't have a difficulty with going into the executive. So I don't think that the view of the DUP is the view of all unionists, and I think that genuinely there is negotiations going on, and I think they will come under pressure just from a very practical point of view, from the fact that there is money there in the executive to be given out towards helping with the cost of living. Their constituents want that and need that just as much as Sinn Féin's constituents. So I think that I would be hopeful that we would see an executive formed. I do think it'll probably be another few weeks, but I do think it will happen. And I think that's going to be one of the major challenges in regards to talking about a border poll or talking about United Ireland. But I think there's been a lot more things achieved. If you look at, not to be going back over it, but if you do look at that relationship that was formed between Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness, and things, much more difficult situations that have come out, I really do think that there is hope there. It takes, I would say, a huge amount of patience, serious negotiation skills, but I would have hope about it.
Okay.
And very briefly.
Aon, I don't want to turn this into a political row. Joe is a Fianna Fáil councillor. You're obviously from the Labour Party. But he's made comments there about his Catholic school upbringing, and I might just let you address it yourself.
Well, I mean, look, that's fine, but the comment was made, well, if we have to change what we are to suit other people, then that's a red line. But that's fine, well, then we might as well just pack up and forget about the whole conversation. Because if we think that we don't have to change what we are to facilitate a new start, then we're wasting our time. South Africa completely changed their society, the way that they ran their democracy. They tore up their flag, they started again. They had a recognition that things needed to radically change. And if you believe in a republic, you believe in everybody being equal, and that no outside agency, no church, no corporate entity, no family is more important than that central equality. That's just what it is. And we have allowed these state services to be delivered by not the state. And I don't understand why, from a logical point of view, if you're serious about telling people from the north that they can be part of a new society, that will still insist on separating children on the basis of religion or gender or income. I just don't see how it stands up to any scrutiny. And if we're willing to make that change, I think that somebody in the north who's tired of sectarian division and tired of religious division, they might have an interest in that education system. But if we're going to cling to what we have and say it won't change for anybody, well, then we might as well just pack up now.
Okay, this gentleman here has a question. Sorry. Okay.
Okay, so just a bit of context here before the question. Given there's a dynamic shift in political trends since 2020 here, mirrored in the Assembly elections, what would you say to those people who actually use the border to consolidate their own political gains in both regions for the last century, but still to this day and would hope to do so at the behest of progress?
Does anyone want to take that? Or do you want to maybe clarify it a little?
Who would suit it to have a border there because they were not an All-Ireland institution. So once it's opened up on an All-Ireland basis, their political structures would be reduced, their voter base. You get where I'm coming from?
Right, do you mean political vested interests?
Yes.
Okay, so that they may be against a border poll because they'll have to redraw constituency boundaries, and John McGuinness mightn't top the poll.
That's what we're asking them to do, as much as you're asking, people in the south to do likewise, although they're coming from a far bigger base, I think, politically, what you're talking about. And in the whole of the island, I think it's Sinn Féin is the all-island party, if you like. You have to acknowledge that. But yeah, that's a bigger question. And as I said to you earlier on, we're not going to get to a united Ireland immediately. That isn't going to happen. And that question that you've asked is relevant because parties in the north who are much smaller and dealing with a smaller base will look at how they're going to be almost overtaken by parties in the south in terms of their sizes. So you have to find a mechanism to bring about, the what we want within the country, but catering for the middle house or the safe house as you go along through the process. That will have to be done. And in terms of what Joe Malone has said there, the question of the police and the army, that's a question that will arise. But again, it's not a question that has to be answered immediately. It has to be planned for. Because you're not going to get that big question answered on day one. And I would say that the word respect is a two-way street. We have to respect everyone. And while Joe would talk about the Catholic Church, I would say that Protestants have an equal right. I would say that the Muslims have an equal right. I would say that anyone else of any other religion has an equal right in this country. And that's what we have to examine and look at. And I think it's a doable thing because of the fact that in the 26th county, we've moved so far in my lifetime, that I never thought that we would move that distance so quickly. And younger people force that issue as we go along. And I think that, if we educate ourselves, if we present what we might view as an outcome, then we will, I think, be doing a good day's work leading to a poll at the end of the day. I would say one thing about public sector jobs in the north, and you're perfectly right. And that too would have to change. But then again, look at the opportunities that would be there, both north and south, for employment. Look at the opportunity north and south for investment from abroad. You're selling one island, you're selling one economy, you're selling one of everything, and you're bound to benefit by that. When you go abroad selling Ireland, you're not asked, are you from the north or the south? You're asked for the population of Ireland, where are the universities, and that's all they're interested in. And I think that America, the European Union, the UK and Ireland have a big, Irish government, have a huge role to play in forming this debate so that nobody goes down that rabbit hole of any sort, and that we're able to progress it along the lines. And lastly, I would say on education, my children were educated in a Church of Ireland school, in a mixed school. And in Kilkenny, we have the largest boarding school that was Church of Ireland in the country. And today, it's a public school, mixed. And everyone is doing very well in that school, and I haven't heard a complaint about it. And I believe that to be the model for the future.
And by the way, we also have, and I know you've talked about this, John, on the radio, we have a third level institution in Carlow College that has just been gifted to the state. And I know there's a process there that they're going through at the moment, but that's another sign maybe that there is some change coming as regards the religious orders.
But as part of what Aidan has said, it is, you know, the state or the Catholic Church gifting to the state without any ties.
Yeah.
So
no strings attached, they said.
They too, as an organisation, the Catholic Church, and I'm a practicing Catholic, they too are changing. Everybody sees the movement that's going on, and they're structuring and moving to suit the changes in Irish society, because that is what is being demanded of them.
Okay, and our Mullinavat man, sorry I've forgotten your name.
My name is Richard Grant, PC. I'm 40 years a member of Fianna Fáil, and I just want to make I have a first cousin. He's living in Mahara in the County Derry, and he's married up there. And as far as I can see, the people living in Northern Ireland have a far higher standard of living than we down here in the Republic. You know, that's the way I see it anyway.
Okay. Well,
yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Richard. So that issue, yeah.
I just want to add on another thing
Yeah.
In relation to that does go on to a referendum that it seems that we're talking about just people on the island of Ireland, you know. That I feel that if that does go for a referendum, that the Irish diaspora abroad should also be involved in this as well, you know. So the people in America, in Australia, Irish people in America, the Irish people in Australia, all different continents around the world, that they also must be involved in that debate, and that then if that vote does go ahead, you know, if that border poll does go ahead, that it goes through the relevant embassies, Irish embassies, you know. I feel just wanted to let that as well, you know, just wanted to make that.
I just want to try and there's 4 or 5 people who've indicated, so we have to be very brief because we only have about 10 minutes left, but I'm sure we can continue our conversations in the lobby afterwards. So just the question was on quality of life.
You buying the pints?
Absolutely. We'll put them on your expenses, if that's all right. So, I don't get any. Richard's question was on the quality of life being better across the border. So just a brief answer for him, because I want to let some others in.
Really I think that's totally dependent on maybe who you meet or what their situation is, because you could visit a particular family here locally and say, gosh, they have a great standard of living. So I think it just depends, really. I don't think you can say for definite. I know that certainly some of the stuff has been mentioned around maybe school books or school buses being free and the NHS, but there's lots of problems as well with the NHS, and people will tell you that too. So I think it totally depends, and I think that actually was one of the strongest things coming through the elections, is that whether you were a nationalist or unionist or whatever you identified as, the cost of living was a big issue for you, and it's a big issue north and south. So I think that kind of can be subjective at times.
Okay, Fiona.
Hi, Fiona O'Neill. just mum, family care of a child who has a number of disabilities. We talk about having representation on these debates, and it's the one thing that's not represented as a child. So is there any plans to bring this format, so it's not kind of a political question, but a format in these debates to bring them to schools, to bring them to secondary schools, and they're the voters of the future. If we're talking about 5, 6, 7 years' time, by the time they get to their Leaving Cert, if it's a piece of work that could be started in the schools, has it been thought about to bring this debate to the education system, and not just normal schools? Normal is the wrong word, but the likes of the youth reaches of Ireland and across the island.
That's a brilliant point of discussion. I know, Jerry, you're the organiser and you're not on the panel, but any plans to branch out to the schools? He's shocked. He's shocked.
You'll have to say yes now.
Have to say yes. Well, listen, Fiona, it was a really good point. So I think everyone who's organising will take it on board.
Yeah, I might just say, I remember the time of the Constitutional Convention, I organised something in my own constituency, was to bring the number of topics that were to be debated at the Constitution to local schools. And the engagement was fantastic. Young people are generally well ahead of adults in terms of these discussions. I absolutely agree about Irish people abroad having a vote. I also think we need to talk about reducing the age of those who vote. In the Scottish independent referendum, it was 16-year-olds, and they care more about issues of equality or their future than about taxes and things like that. They're more visionary, and they add so much more to the debate. Now, you'd have to be careful as to how you manage it in a school setting, that it's within certain parameters and it doesn't go off the rails. But I think it's a really exciting proposal, and I would absolutely support you, yeah.
Okay, just the guy here, yeah. Yeah, just in blue here, Jerry, sorry.
All right, so Eamon Doran, local member of O'Green Fall Kilkenny. So we discussed during this event that young people in the north won't have baggage. But the fact is, many young people in the north, particularly young unionists, have grown up without family members because they were murdered by terrorist organisations who associated themselves with republicanism and were directly supported by Sinn Féin. So how can we possibly convince these young people that a republic is a good idea when Republicans murdered their family members? Thanks very much.
Okay. Kathleen, do you want to answer that?
How did I know you were going to come to me, Emer? So on that, I think it's the same as how you convince somebody who is from a Republican background who had family members killed by maybe the UVF, or, for example, the Dublin and Monaghan bombings, where... So just about 2 weeks ago, there was the anniversary of the Dublin and Monaghan bombings. We have the situation with lots of different legacy situations, and I think that there's no hierarchy of victims. That's my strong opinion on that, that there is wrong done when you're in a war situation on all sides. You know, I think we're nearly 25 years on from the Good Friday Agreement, and, you know, there is going to be legacy issues, but those legacy issues are on all sides, and they're just as difficult for Republicans as they are Unionists. And the big thing is there isn't a hierarchy of victims. And while I have the chance, I just want to say I totally agree with Fiona. I can't understand why more secondary schools don't, some secondary schools, and John will know this locally, will invite us in, have a discussion, not necessarily on this, but just in general on politics. I think that should be a lot more standard. Trips to the Dáil, the schools can come up, they can get in contact with us. You know, those kind of opportunities, I would encourage schools. Yeah, exactly. And I agree as well with the votes abroad. Okay, I'm getting all my points in now. So.
I'm sorry, we only have time for 2 more questions,
I
Nicky.
agree with the engaging with the young people, but I go back to a point I said earlier when I was at the podium. I think whenever the discussion takes place and the actual voting will take place on a United Ireland, and it will happen someday, I'm not sure it'll happen in my lifetime, I would still think that the challenge for people who are promoting that whole concept will be the young people, or the people who will vote at that time, will always consider, how is this going to affect me? So if this is going to happen in 10, 20, 30 years' time, what will the issues be about the economy, about housing, about health, about other matters? Because I believe at the end of the day, that the traditional way we might have thought in this country about the republicanism and all of that, I think young people in this day and age will not have the same views. It will be, how will this vote impact me in terms of how I live and how my family lives? And I think that's ultimately going to be key in setting out the parameters around that type of border poll.
And that's why I say that you need to move to the concept of a new republic, embracing all of that. And I would say to Fiona that I hope the organisers take that on board, because that really is an important point. Can I say to Joe Malone and somebody else that asked a question, I think was Eamon, there was atrocities on either side, on every side, on any side, and there was innocents that were killed and murdered as well. We have to bear that in mind. But if we're going to move forward, you can't dwell on that. You have to understand it, recognise it, but we got to move on. And on the question of Sinn Féin North and South, I would say that I would treat Sinn Féin as I would any other political party. We've asked them to go down the route of, peace and the discussion on all of this in Northern Ireland, and it happened. You can't not recognise the fact that they participated and played their part. And likewise, there's a part to be played in the South, and the political parties in the South must recognise that. You cannot turn your back on democracy just because it suits you.
Okay, and a question here.
Will Sinn Féin bring in 9-month abortions in the South?
Sorry,
They just put 9-month abortions in the North. I was up there recently, and a lot of people in the North are very upset about 9-month abortions.
Sorry, you've been very disrespectful. We have you have here, because we have a system where people are asking questions. You've just barged in on this gentleman here. Go ahead with your question.
To discuss, I don't think it's disrespectful to discuss 9-month abortions.
I think how you've gone about it is extremely rude and disrespectful. And actually, I'd ask you to leave the meeting.
That's not equivalent to the question I just
might
asked.
actually do a bit of medical research on it first.
Babies in the North now.
I'm sorry. Can we please let the gentleman in the front?
So I can take it that Sinn Féin will be bringing in 9-month abortions.
I think you should actually go and do a bit of medical research. You can't actually have a 9-month abortion.
Well, you can in the North.
No, you can't. Nobody can. It's medically impossible. It's medically impossible.
Can I please ask you just to remove yourself from the meeting? Do. I'm sorry about that, and I apologise to the panel for being exposed to that as well.
He's got his clip for social media now. Off he goes.
You have your social media snap.
It wasn't Sinn Féin who brought this motion. It was the people of Ireland in 66.4% of the vote voted in a free democratic referendum to remove the 8th Amendment. So you've lost. You still want to have that row. It's up to you, but you've lost.
Could you please close the door behind you? Thanks very much.
Good man.
No, it's fine. No, it's fine. No. This is what I expected. Complete denial, complete unwillingness
66.4%.
of the debate.
66.4%.
There are other people.
9-month-old babies.
66.4%.
40-week babies.
Would you please leave the room?
40 weeks and 9 months. It's just typical of the style of argument.
Show respect to the chair.
Traitors, every single one of you.
Close the door behind you.
You're absolutely sick. You're brainwashed. You're fucking stupid.
Thanks, Jim.
Being very patient with you. You might have a good question now.
Why me?
I think we're going to wrap up. I'm so sorry, but I just have time for your question and your question.
My name is Martin Dowan. I'm a member of Sinn Féin. James Stevens coming. Just someone mentioned that there's a non-participation of unionists here. First of all, we have to get our own house in order. We have to get all our own political parties together, which we did in 1948. We had an all-party forum, bar none, about partition of the country. Now, it wasn't very successful. We'd have, in the United Ireland, we'd have 7 million plus. I think we could be a hugely successful nation. A lot of the talk here is all very negative. There's no one here. We're not arguing the point with unionists at the moment. We have to get this right in our own heads, first of all. And we all have to be united on this. Sinn Féin, Fianna Fáil, Labour, Fine Gael, we all have to be united. It's the only way to do it. Get our own house in order first, and then move forward and talk to the unions people.
Okay.
Now, just another point. You know, and if you tip your head back a small bit, you look more like Warren Beatty than.
I wasn't sure what he was going to say there.
I didn't know where that was
Thank you
going
very
there,
much. I'm sorry, just here.
Sorry, thanks very much for Ireland's future, and I look forward to going to one of them. I'm originally from County Derry, not too far from Mahara, and believe me, the people down here and the north are very much the same. The biggest problem in Ireland has been inequality for all people, whether it be Catholics, nationalists in the north for the last 50 years. If we had had this conversation 50 years in the south of Ireland, we may not have had the troubles that arose over the last 50 years. And we may not have had young people killed on both sides. And believe me, there's many people who were killed on both sides with the involvement of the British government, British state forces and British informers. A local GA man of our own, Sean Brown, was murdered 20 years ago, and his anniversary was last week. This week we celebrate the anniversary of Eddie Fullerton in Donegal, another Sinn Féin councillor who was murdered by British state forces and informers. And the sooner we get Britain out of Ireland and work with the unionists and work with all the people of Ireland, the better. The border has been the biggest problem in Ireland for the last 100 years. And as long as it stays there, there'll still be problems in Ireland. We can all work together, unionists and nationalists, southerners and northerners. And believe me, once the border's broken, and that border poll is won, and people need to be working towards that there in every aspect in the south, then problems will go away. And if we don't do it, history will come back to us. Believe me. We're already seeing unionism moving further and further away from a middle ground, with the TUV improving in their votes in the north, with making up problems like the protocol and the effects of the protocol in Ireland. You know, and it's to sustain a small rump of loyalism and their supremacy over, and it's about their hatred of inequality. So that's really all I have to say.
Okay. Thank you very much. Our panel have been incredibly generous with their time. I was supposed to wrap up at 8:30. We've gone over. I'm conscious. I know there's more of you who have questions. So maybe afterwards, if any of our panel are sticking around for a few minutes, you might be able to engage with them in person. But from all of us here tonight, thank you very much for coming along, and to everybody who was watching and following online. Thanks to you as well, and thanks to the organiser who is here with us this evening for Ireland's Future, Jerry Carlisle. Gur míle maith.